Hi again everyone. As I mentioned in the introductory video to the channel, one of the crucial areas to establish at outset when becoming a resident here in Portugal is your legal residency status and also your tax residency status. And from experience, it's one of the most confusing and grey areas, and I want to get into a bit more detail, dig a bit deeper in this video, so that by the end of it you'll have a clear understanding of the different terminology and what you need to do. So let's get into it. Okay, so when we're talking about legal residence, that just means your right to reside in a country. So when I first came to Portugal, I was an EU citizen because the UK was still part of the EU at that time, and I was granted an EU residency certificate, and that gave me the right to live here for 5 years. So that was my legal position. I was legally entitled to reside in Portugal for a period of 5 years. Now, if you're a British national, you're coming here, you have a slightly different process to establish your legal right. So typically that will be through some sort of visa, whether that be the Golden Visa, D7 visa, and I talk about that in a separate video. Now, your legal right can be important in several ways. The most obvious is how long you're legally allowed to spend in a country. Another one would be your entitlement to rights such as healthcare, social security, but it doesn't impact on your tax status. So what's tax status? Well, this is a very loose definition, and tax residency can be defined in many different ways according to each country, but a common feature, irrespective of which country you're looking at, is based on physical presence. So a lot of countries have a 183-day rule. So if you're there less than 183 days, you're not a tax resident, and vice versa. If you've exceeded 183 days, you are considered resident. Now, as I say, that's a very loose general rule, but it is quite a good guideline. And there are exceptions, most notably America. So America uses nationality as their basis for tax assessment. So if you're a US citizen, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you still have a liability back home in the US to pay tax there. So tax residency is important because it determines who has the taxing rights over you. And as a general rule, if you're tax resident in one country, you have to pay tax on your worldwide income and gains. So I'm a tax resident here in Portugal, and therefore it doesn't matter where my income and gains are arising from, whether that be in Portugal or elsewhere in the world, I have to declare any gains and income, irrespective of where they originate from, here in my tax return in Portugal. So, what is the Portuguese definition of tax residency? So for those of you who are looking to become tax resident here, or maybe are a bit unclear about the rules and you're here at the moment, I've put a link in the video below, so you can click below to an OECD page which covers residency definitions, and I'm just going to pull that up on screen now. So there's two key definitions from a Portuguese standpoint, and as you'll see in the link, you have the 183-day rule. So if you're present in Portugal for more than 183 days consecutive or not in any 12-month period, so it's not necessarily a calendar year, it's a rolling 12-month period, then you're a tax resident here. But conversely, you don't necessarily have to be here 183 days. So the second point on the OECD bullet point there is the person is in Portugal for a shorter period, but essentially considers his main home here. So you can elect to be a tax resident by spending less than 183 days here. And a lot of people will say, well, why would I voluntarily elect to be a tax resident somewhere? Well, for most people coming to Portugal, the reason is to establish your right under the non-habitual residency programme. So that's a 10-year tax-free scheme. Again, there's quite a lot of detail involved in that scheme, so I'm going to cover that in a separate video. But it allows you to be here essentially less than 183 days and still qualify for tax breaks here. So, looking at some common myths that I hear when talking to clients or potential clients. The first is you can't choose your residency, so you can't choose your tax status as such. So I have a lot of clients, or potential clients rather, that are calling me at the moment because they want to come here under the new 10-year tax-free scheme. And they say, I want to remain in the UK, I don't really want to move to Portugal, but I want to take advantage of Portuguese tax breaks. Well, it doesn't work because, as I said earlier, your tax residency is generally determined by your physical presence. So if you're going to be in the UK for most or all of the year, you can't, by definition, be a tax resident here in Portugal because you have to be physically present as a general rule. Similarly, a lot of people say to me, well, I'm registered in the UK to pay taxes, so therefore I'm not a Portuguese tax resident. But again, a piece of paper saying that you're registered as a tax resident doesn't necessarily mean you're tax resident. Again, coming back to the physical presence issue. And the other point I hear people get confused about is nationality. So people are often concerned that by becoming a tax resident here in Portugal, you have to change your nationality or give up passports. That's not the case. It's a completely separate issue, and you don't have to change your nationality at all. Now, the other issue with regard to tax residency is not only meeting the tax residency definition of Portugal, but also, equally important, making sure you've escaped the system you're leaving. So if you're in the UK at the moment, for example, how do you make sure you've exited that tax system and made a clean break? And also making sure that on an ongoing basis you stay out of the UK tax net. And that's covered in a lot of detail in the UK's statutory residence test, which is part of the Finance Act 2013. Again, very detailed, but I'm going to cover that in a separate video again. Equally, you could be leaving somewhere else in the world, not necessarily UK, and you have to be cognizant of how they treat tax residency. So I spoke with a gentleman recently who was making the move from Spain to Portugal, and he clearly wanted to establish his tax position here and benefit from the non-habitual residence scheme. But Spain have a slightly different system to Portugal. So what they will say is, not only do you have to move here to Portugal, but you also need to make sure that your family do, and also your economic interests do. So basically you need to make a clean break from Spain in order to be clearly detached from their tax system. So it's just food for thought there, just making sure you understand not only the rules here in Portugal, but also the rules where you're coming from and how to detach yourself cleanly from that tax system. The other issue that some people find confusing is what's called domicile. And domicile is generally used from a UK inheritance tax perspective. I'm going to be covering this in a lot more detail under a succession and inheritance tax planning video because it's so involved, but all you need to know for the moment is that domicile, in a very loose way, is where you originate from. And from a UK perspective, you're deemed to originate from where your father was from. So if your father was born in the UK and is a British national, you are deemed to have a UK domicile of origin. And it's that determines your liability to UK inheritance tax, for example. So if you're moving to Portugal, that isn't by itself going to change your domicile. Again, it's a very involved area. I'm going to be looking at it in a lot more detail in a separate video, and things will become clearer then. I hope this video gave you a better understanding of residency and the difference between legal residency and tax residency. If you want to explore these issues in a lot more detail, then I'll also put a link below in the description to a series of podcasts that a barrister called Harriet Brown, who's based in the UK and Jersey, and a solicitor qualified in Gibraltar called Graham Jackson. They've done an excellent podcast series which covers these issues in a lot more detail and expands on other related topics. So if you are interested, I'd suggest you also check that series out. It's very insightful. So that's it for me for now. I look forward to seeing you in the next videos, and we'll build on this discussion, fill in any gaps, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.